Everyone, it's a little after 1 o'clock here in Eastern Time of Indiana, so we're going to get started. Today we're doing a webinar on pre-employment transition services. It is hosted by the Indiana Work to Include Coalition. My name is Michelle Oja. I'm a member of the coalition. I also work for the Department of Education's Office of Special Education as a special education specialist. Next slide, please. So our agenda today, we're going to talk about transition and employment outcomes, and I'll be leading that discussion. Followed from that, we'll hear from Jonathan Kraeszig, who is the Director of Youth Services for Vocational Rehabilitation, and Steve Sontag, who is a youth counselor for the for vocational rehabilitation. We're then going to hear from MaryEllen Jones. She is with Stonebelt, and she's going to provide a provider's perspective and examples of services. We're going to hear a teacher's perspective. We're also going to hear from Luke Labas. I totally apologize to you, Luke. I tried so hard. I just want to say it as a short A, not a long A. And then go over some final thoughts. As we go through today, there should be at the bottom of your screen, if you hover, a toolbar. There's going to be a chat feature and a Q&A feature. If you could please use the Q&A feature to ask your questions and use the chat if you're having any technical difficulties. We'll have people who are monitoring both, and they'll be able to ask our panelists questions, and for them to respond. There'll be pauses at the end of each section for questions and answers, and then for those people who have technical difficulty, they'll respond to you directly in chat. Next slide, please. So Work to Include has 4 main goals. The first is to advance employment first through the alignment of state agency policies and practices, expand coalition members and support local action teams to advance employment first, develop an employer outreach, awareness, and leadership campaign, and provide ongoing information dissemination related to employment, solutions to barriers, and success stories. Next slide, please. So why pre-employment transition services? Well, 20.8% of working age Hoosiers with a disability were employed in 2019 compared to 68.7% without a disability. Next slide, please. Each year, the Department of Education has a post-school outcome survey that they do. So students who have exited from high school 1 year after they exit, they're contacted if they have an IEP, and they're asked a series of questions about their post-secondary activities since graduation or exit. This past summer, we reached out to those who left school in 2019. We received 600 responses. Out of those 600 responses, 145 had attended a 2 or 4 year college or university for some portion of the time since leaving school. 241 of those individuals were competitively employed. 87% were working 20 or more hours per week. 45 had some form of employment, and less than 1% were employed at a sheltered workshop. Next slide, please. In addition, 10% received short-term employment training through either a provider like Stonebelt or a vocational rehabilitation counselor. 405 were earning at least minimum wage. 84% were employed within their community. 60 are receiving services to gain or keep employment, and 6 were self-employed. 162 were unemployed. However, being unemployed didn't mean that they weren't engaged in some kind of post-secondary activity that could have meant that they were enrolled full-time in a college or university. Next slide, please. I'm now going to turn it over to Jonathan Kraeszig. Again, he is the Director of Youth Services, and then Steve will join as a youth counselor also from Voc Rehab. Jonathan, take it away.
I will. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate it. Again, my name is Jonathan Kraeszig. I'm the Director of Youth Services with Vocational Rehabilitation. Happy Thursday. I'm excited to be here today and support Work to Include. I really believe in their mission, and it's really something I've believed in since I started in this field about 30 plus years ago, which I can't imagine. If you're wondering, I started when I was like 5. So let's talk about Pre-ETS and where that came from and kind of where we're going with that. Pre-ETS came from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, also known as WIOA, which was a law that was signed by President Obama in 2014, June or July of 2014. I can't remember exactly, but sort of throughout, did a lot of different things, but throughout the law, there's an emphasis on competitive integrated employment. That was sort of a huge part of the law. And it also created pre-ETS or pre-employment transition services. And it really expanded what VR is required to do. So we are required to set aside 15% from our federal VR program funds. So we get about 80% federal funds and about 20% state funds. So of that 80% federal funds, $9 to $10 million of that has to be used for pre-ETS or pre-employment transition services to students with disabilities. And the other way it sort of expanded what we are able to do or what we were required to do is that it also reaches potentially eligible students. So students who are under an IEP or a 504 plan or have some other type of disability, documented disability, are eligible for pre-employment transition services. So potentially eligible students will not have applied and been found eligible for VR. So again, it expands the individuals with whom we work through this. So next slide, please. So there's 5 focus areas for pre-ETS, and what the federal law says is that we have to make these services or these activities available to students with disabilities statewide. And we'll get into a little bit more about how we do that here in a second. But these are the 5 focus areas. The first one is job exploration counseling, which can include any of these things listed here. These are just examples, so it's not limited to these things like interest surveys, reviewing career websites, identifying pathways of interest, work-based learning experiences, which could be paid or unpaid work experiences, volunteers, job shadows. It could be simply doing a tour of a job site. Counseling on post-secondary education opportunities. So gaining awareness of career pathways, post-secondary training opportunities, counseling to support a smooth transition from high school to post-secondary, assistance filling out financial aid forms or looking up scholarships. That can all be included in post-secondary education. So the next 2 for the next slide are workplace readiness, kind of just what it sounds like, soft skills training, employability skills. It also includes social and interpersonal skills, as well as independent living skills, and that sort of training, and instruction and self-advocacy. So instruction and self-awareness, disability disclosure, when to do that, how you might want to approach that, requesting accommodations, and mentoring, including peer mentoring. So really the sort of the overarching theme, if you will, behind these 5 activities is to prepare students for employment. It's not necessarily to get out there and start working immediately, but to get students ready so that when they transition from high school to adult life or to college, that they have more of the skills they need to be able to work successfully, find employment that matches their skills and their interests, that kind of thing. That's really sort of the whole overarching idea behind pre-employment transition services. So next slide. So students and youth with disabilities, this is kind of an important distinction. Pre-ETS is available only to students with disabilities, and that the definition of that is individuals with a disability in secondary, or it could be post-secondary, so college, vocational training, a student could be enrolled in that, age 14 through age 22. So basically up to their 23rd birthday. If an individual is a student with a disability in high school or past high school, they would qualify for pre-ETS. Youth with disability is defined a little bit differently. That's simply an individual with a disability age 14 through 24, period. That's it. So they may or may not be in school. And the reason this is important is because it's only students with disabilities are eligible for pre-ETS. So you have to be enrolled in some type of training program, whether that's high school or post-secondary or other types of training programs. If you're considered a student and you have maybe an IEP or 504 plan, then you would qualify for that. If you're a youth with disability and you feel like you need these types of services, I would suggest that you go ahead and apply for what I call our traditional VR services. Okay, so next slide. Oh, and this is where Steve is taking over. So next up is Steve Sontag, and he will introduce himself. He's one of our youth counselors. So Steve, take it away.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. Good afternoon, everybody. So Jonathan gave you a background on Pre-ETS, a little bit of the history. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the services are actually provided. So Indiana Voc Rehab has contracted with 12 different providers to provide Pre-ETS services in individual local areas of the state. So we currently serve all 92 counties, and we have Pre-ETS programs in over 400 schools currently, and are always trying to increase that. So of those 12 contractors, 2 do specific specialized services. That's hands and autism and in-source, and they provide services all over the state. But the other 10 have particular areas that they cover and schools that they cover, usually based on the counties. That's how we're divided up. There are these links at the bottom of this page that you can access some of the information I'm going to have on the following slide. So you'll have access to this presentation, so you can find those resources on these links. Next slide, please. So the 12 providers, like I said, it's a lot of information on these sheets, but it shows what counties they cover. So we have Bona Vista, Easter Seals Arc of Northeast Indiana, Central Indiana Collaborative, which is run by Easter Seals Crossroads, Gap Lock, Hands on Autism, In-Source, and you can go to the next slide. So then you have New Horizons, which is down in the southeastern part of the state, Peak, Prairie Quest Consulting, Public Consulting Group, Stone Belt, and Sycamore Services. So each of these providers has their own, what we call career counselors, that go into the schools and do the actual Pre-ETS services, either one-on-one or in groups with students. And obviously for the past year, a lot of their services have been done virtually online. We've had to be real creative in how those services were provided. In addition to these providers or contractors, there are other providers that are subcontracted out. So there's more than these 12 actually providing services, but they each have their individual career counselors that go out and work with the students. It's not really a set program. Each individual career counselor has the flexibility to design the activities that they include based on the student's needs, what the student's interests are and disabilities are. So they kind of pattern them to the individual student. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that I was a youth counselor. So there's 8 youth counselors currently working for Voc Rehab. And again, we're in different parts of the state. I work in the central area, so I live in the Indianapolis area and work in Marion County, Hamilton, Boone, and Hendricks counties. And here are some of the things that the youth counselors do. We assist the actual individual Pre-ETS providers and help them with activities and monitor the results. So we work closely with the individual providers with any questions or issues that come up, and just assist them the best we can to help them provide best possible services for the students involved. We also maintain connection with the local schools, the transition team, special education department. We try to keep those lines of communication open to assist them any way we can with the Pre-ETS program. We also do community outreach with local employers and other service providers. So part of our job is really to just increase awareness of the projects we're working on, increase opportunities for the students or graduates with disabilities, and try to spread the word best we can so that there are more and more opportunities available for them. Back please. We also help with providing training and technical assistance for the providers. When there's a new counselor hired, we try to help introduce them at the schools, get them acclimated, and help them in any way we can. In some cases, the youth counselors do provide direct services to the students, but that's usually only in special cases. Normally, the providers provide those services. We also act as a liaison between the local voc rehab offices and the schools. So we may help with informing the schools how to submit referrals for VR services when their students get closer to their graduation time, or they can actually get services, VR services, while they are in pre-ETS. But we help with those, I guess we help with the communication to make sure all that goes smoothly. And then another responsibility that each of us has is to develop and help facilitate a growth plan so that we can continue to serve more and more students. Next, please. Here's some of the things we do, and this is not, it's just kind of a list of some of the things that I've been involved with and other youth counselors. We help with school transition fairs. We try to be there, represent voc rehab and pre-ETS services. We sometimes do that with other VR counselors, sometimes on our own. We help attend students' IEP case conferences, and it's not just us. Sometimes it's the pre-ETS provider counselor, sometimes it's a voc rehab counselor. That's just one of our responsibilities, that we help with those annual conferences when we are asked. And then I think all of the 8 of us are involved with the local transition teacher cadre groups, and we communicate with that group on a monthly basis or as needed. We just are a resource for them when they need us. The other things we work on is we work with the local workforce development boards, work one offices, any disability advocacy group, like work to include other social service providers, Park of Indiana, and other local services. We try to do our best to get involved in partnerships with the local providers in our individual areas. The other thing we try to do is connect with local employers, and especially their diversity inclusion departments, again, just to increase the opportunities for our students. And it may be while they're in pre-ETS that we just increase the opportunities for a job shadow or an informational interview, or just to learn about the local companies. Maybe the students don't even know the local employers in their area, so just to increase that awareness. And we also try to develop partnerships with the local universities or community colleges, and specifically the Office of Disability Services, so we understand how that accommodation network works when we have students that are interested in those particular schools. Next, please. So the last thing I'm going to cover is like the enrollment process for pre-ETS. So most of our providers take referrals from the local schools. So if you're on this webinar and you're interested in learning more, ask your school people with special education or the transition people about pre-ETS. And if your school has a pre-ETS program, then obviously they can go through the referral process with you. If they do not, then you can reach out to the local provider, or you can reach out to voc rehab. There's some contact information at the end of this presentation where you can reach out directly to us for help with that. So when there is a referral, the provider will receive information from the school, and it'll include a release of information and disability documentation, either a copy of your IEP or 504. And after that, the provider would contact the student, or the student and the parent, or maybe through a teacher, but they will make contact to do an intake rubric, to just ask some basic information about the student's work history, what their interests are, all those kinds of things. And then they develop some basic goals on what areas they're going to work on with the student. And like I said, each student is, kind of treated individually. There's not a set program that that the counselor uses step by step. It's all developed based on the individual's interest or what their goals are, or some of the recommendations from parents or teachers. Sometimes those come into play and how they set up the program. It's important to note that the provider cannot work with a student until they have the release from the school and the disability documentation. And I think that's the end. And I think we're going to open up for questions for Jonathan or I for anything involved with Pre-ETS.
This is Jonathan. I did see a question in chat. I'll just jump in, I guess. It says, can you please talk a little bit about who qualifies for Pre-ETS? It's my understanding a student does not need to have an IEP or 504. Can we hear a little bit more about the definition of disability and who can qualify? So yeah, that's correct. I mean, we work mostly with students with IEPs and 504 plans, but we don't strictly have to have an IEP or 504, but we do need some type of disability documentation, a doctor's note, some testing records, whatever. And usually the easiest way to do that is just to get the IEP or the 504 plan from the school. And that's it. Basically, it's very simple. Any sort of disability documentation, and if you're a student in that age range, then you qualify. So it's fairly wide open and pretty easy. Does that answer your question? It was Barb, I think, asked that. Or did you have anything else? Oh, here's something in QA. Oh, is this from Cecilia? Hi, Cecilia. We miss you, VR. You mentioned providers work with groups and individually. How much individual work with students is able to be done throughout the state, given the number of students who qualify for Pre-ETS and the number of providers? Oh, Cecilia, that's a good question. So, it says Michelle Oja would like to answer this question live. Did you want to jump in, Michelle?
Oh, no, I was just marking it so that it would move so that you wouldn't forget which questions were answered and what
I don't
were.
understand
Sorry.
how this stuff works, even after
you just answer the questions. I'll make them appear and disappear in the Q&A.
Oh, God love you. And Cecilia says hi, Jonathan. Hi, Michelle. So, okay. And that depends on the provider and their capacity. So some providers, in order to have more students involved, will do group activities, but those group activities are still, to some extent, based on individual needs. So you're not going to have students in a group activity who have no interest in like post-secondary training, or it's just not something that's one of their goals. So even group activities are still based on individual need. So I mean, I can't strictly answer how much individual work with students is done. What I would say is there's probably more group activities initially, like with some of the younger students, maybe freshmen, sophomores. And then I think in most cases, it becomes more individualized as students get sort of closer to graduation and closer to kind of making some of those big major life decisions. MaryEllen, you might be able to answer some of this as one of our providers, or it might be part of your presentation. I don't know, but if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I'm talking about groups and one-on-ones when we get into my presentation.
Okay. So we'll kind of leave that to you to answer some of that in a little more detail as one of our premier providers. How about that? I just realized there's probably some other providers, and they're all wonderful who are listening. I'm having of putting my foot in my mouth, so there you go. Any other? Those have both been answered. Any other questions? There's some stuff on chat, I think, Michelle.
There is some things on chat. Do you want me to read them to you, or do you see them now?
I've got them pulled up since I'm
Great.
not, except I keep scrolling past them. Can homeschoolers be a part of Pre-ETS? Yes, and they are actually. That's an excellent question. Early on, we realized that there are a lot of students throughout the state who are homeschooled. And in terms of homeschooling, it would depend on the county. So if you have a student who's homeschooled and is interested, we have some Pre-ETS documents that show which providers work with which counties and that kind of thing. So you would contact the provider listed in that county. And in most cases, I haven't had anybody refuse or say they don't have the capacity to work with a homeschooled student. And it's even easier now, I think, honestly, because a lot of stuff is virtual. So if you have a decent internet connection, which I know is not always assured, you can be part of groups with some other students, or of course individualized if that's needed. So yes, definitely homeschooled. You mentioned referrals from the schools. This includes K-12 and colleges. So any students age 14 through age 22, so up to their 23rd birthday would be included. So we do have like some junior high students who are maybe age 14 or 15 who would be included in that. But mostly it's high school is really our major focus. In terms of colleges, what happens in those cases is that maybe a student graduates and moves from high school to a college, and in a lot of cases, the pre-ETS provider would follow them. We get a few referrals from colleges, but our main focus is high school at this point. So one new message, let me see. Do the consent from the schools include consent from the guardians? Yes, so our providers work directly with the schools on what the school needs for that. So if the school, if a student has a parent or guardian that, they're under the age of 18, then yeah, they would need to sign off on that. I have a student in a residential placement in Northern Indiana. Is there a provider in that region to allow pre-ETS services to begin now instead of waiting for his return to our school? So the individual is still a student, right? But they're virtual, I think is what you mean. So yes, there's a provider in that area. And I don't know if, Pat, I wonder if you can send out to all of our attendees, there's a pre-ETS basics form, and then there's a county school providers form that lists the providers and the counties and the schools that they serve. So I don't know, maybe if Pat could send that out once the presentation is over, and you'll have that. And then as Steve said, there's contact information. I don't know if it's the very end of this presentation, and you can contact me or send an email to our pre-ETS email box, which I monitor. So like for more details on that, I can help you make that connection. Anything else? I think we're running short on time. We probably should go ahead and move on to the next presenter, and we're still available at the end if there's more questions. Yeah. So MaryEllen.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, I'm MaryEllen Jones from Stonebelt. I'm the Youth and Family Supports Manager, and I'm going to talk to you today about how we provide services, the pre-ETS services here in our area. Just a little caveat. What I say is not golden in how it should be. Every area is going to be different. It's going to be based on, the school, the environment, rural, versus urban. So just kind of keep that in mind. These are just ideas. These are things that we do just to give you some information. So some of the key elements for providing pre-ETS services. As a provider, you need to make sure that that referral process is easy for the teachers. We are not here to burden the teachers and put more on their plate. It should be a very easy process. What we do is just have them send us the documentation, the IEP or 504, whatever it is, and then we have a really easy little fill out sheet, a form that we take all that information and put into like our rubric and the information that we need. So it's literally one form and the documented disability. So it should be a very, very simple process. I've heard that there's some other providers that might be having like boatloads of forms that get filled out beforehand. It doesn't need to be that way. It should be very, very simple. Providers are an extension to the teachers. We are duplicating, we're not duplicating, we're supplementing what the teachers are doing. So we're not, recreating the wheel. We're there to just be an extension outside of those four walls to the teachers. And I think the most important thing is that the student needs to be in the driver's seat. So this is not mandated. It's not school. We're not making them go to school. I'm not making anybody come to this program. So it really needs to be about the student, what they want. There can be input from the team, but virtually it's not going to be successful unless that student is in charge and wants to be part of that. Next slide. So what does implementation look like? Well, individual or group. There was a question about that. And I think the question was, how does that look? Like, how much individual time can somebody get with the number of individuals with IEPs? So that can be a little tricky. If we have like really big caseloads, it can be an ebb and flow. So if we have a lot of students at once, for instance, how we handle that is we will do more groups and pull out those individuals that need that individual work. But we're always focusing on trying to get everybody an individual session at least. It is very personalized. Some students don't want individual sessions, some want just groups, and vice versa. Some don't do well in groups. We have some students with social anxiety that only do one-on-ones. So it really depends upon what their goal is and what they're working on. And Jonathan did touch on, like earlier, like in the process, they might be doing those groups to get some of those workplace readiness goals or the soft skills ready before they become one-on-one doing work experiences. So it can be implemented either way. It could be implemented in school, outside of school, in the community, in the home. You know, with COVID, we learned that it could be virtual, which is really cool because we have taken college tours across the United States. We've been everywhere this last year. So we can do that through camps, classes, work experiences, internships, different clubs, volunteering, or events. And so I'm going to share some of the things that we've done with you today. I think the most important thing, if I was to give any advice, would be to get out of the school. You don't want to extend schooling for the students. Like, get them out of the school and then they're more invested. Nothing against school or the teachers, but in high school, everyone's starting to get burnt out and they're looking to get out. So get out of the school. And I just feel like you get more engagement that way. So even when we're having classes and they're after school classes, we try to make it somewhere in the community. Next slide. So some of the classes that we host after school classes. During the school year, the summer looks different. So we have like a Greek life. So we've created like a fraternity for our students that are in Ivy Tech or getting ready to enroll in a college. So because everybody wants to be part of like a club or something, and it's really cool to be in a fraternity. We don't do any hazing, but this is all about like, you know, finding your path in college and filling out FAFSAs. And we had one time where it kind of took a little twist because what was happening was everybody individually was really struggling in their classes. Our Ivy Tech students, they were really having a hard time. And so what we ended up doing was having a group, and we pulled them together so they could kind of share and bounce that off of each other, their college struggles, and learn kind of a peer-to-peer, learn like how to make accommodations within each other. So that was a learning tool as well. So we have student self-advocates. So you'll learn about that as well, that we use that for leadership skills and learning about self-advocacy. We also use that to learn about all different transition services. A girls group, that's super popular. We've called that different things throughout the years, spa day, whatever. A tech group, that's for anybody, but right now it's mostly males that are showing up. This is really servicing all of the students that want to be gamers when they grow up. So we're exploring the different careers that can come out of wanting to be a gamer. And it's really quite interesting. We've made animated videos about what Pre-ETS services are. So that's been fun. And then surviving adulthood. And that includes basically all workplace readiness training. Next. So camps are our most lucrative, and that's because you can get groups, and group billing would be the most lucrative billing, and also because they're extended periods of times. So when we have breaks, so whether it's summer break, winter break, spring break, for us, it's our most lucrative billing time. We've played with it where you can have it all day or 2 sessions and kind of mix it up. And honestly, having 2 sessions tends to be the best. I know that like parents like to have an all day thing because they just want to drop off and then come back and pick up, but it leads to burnout for staff and I think students. And it's just a long day. So we'll have like, what we've done is we'll do a week theme of camps, and that would be like maybe in the afternoons. And then the mornings would be a daily theme of classes. So they can kind of pick and choose, what they want to tune into. Maybe they're interested in a certain week of camps, or maybe they're interested in every Monday class. So we get a variety of students. And then there will be like a lunch break time in between. And then also we have other students that are doing work experiences other than that. So I have another instructor that would be doing work experiences outside of those. We want to use the current community resources to work towards integration. And so we're really community-based with all of our camps and classes. So some of our topics for our camps would be, we had Bake Off. We do that almost every Thanksgiving week, the like 3 days that they have. And that is coming up with a list of things they would need to buy. So the end result is taking something that they would bake something and take it to their family meal, their family Thanksgiving meal. So participating in that and taking that with them. But the steps are, they have to make that list. They have to know how much money they need. They will go to Kroger's with their, with the instructor. They have to find the items. They have to purchase the items, bring them back, measure them, so it's a drawn out thing. And so each student has their own thing, and it's a bake off. And we did it virtually this year too, which was fun. Everybody was in their kitchens. So that was a good time. Video camp, you can see down there in the left-hand corner, we had a green screen. That was at the library. So check your library. Your library's got tons of resources that you may not know about. Another fun thing that was really self-advocacy, and they needed to learn about their own disabilities and be able to share that with other people and how to self-advocate for themselves. Hobby week is always a fun one because you can take a hobby, and we would do a different hobby a day, and it really hones into different work skills. So it could be a hobby, but also could be a career down the road. So just kind of playing with different hobbies and interest and seeing what the students like or don't like. That's always important too. Coffee with the boss is always a favorite. We have somebody that works locally, a boss, or not locally, since COVID's hit. We've had people from across the nation come and talk and do like a Q&A session about what they look for in an employee, what kind of work they do, the different tasks that are involved, and then open for questions. And then so Dress for Success Spa Day was the girls one, volunteer week. And then we built a little pantry too. So we do a lot of community things. So we built a little pantry, and now we have an ambassador that's in charge of keeping that stocked. So all of these things are really workplace readiness training, becoming, a leader, needing to be responsible for things, all of that stuff. So next slide, please. Also internships. So internships, you can partner with things that are already happening. You do not have to create something new. So for instance, here at Stonebelt, behind Stonebelt, we have a greenhouse. So we partnered with our greenhouse and would have shifts of people trying out the greenhouse. And we would do that for like a semester. One of my favorite things is at Christmas time, we partner with our local playhouse, Cardinal Stage, and do ushering training, and we usher at the play that they always have at Christmas time. And it's usually like a Disney themed or something. And so the students have to greet people, and there's tons of people, and hand out, the flyers, and then tell them where the restrooms are. So that's just really cool, because not only that, in between, they get to see a play. And most of these students that do this, it's their first play. So that's kind of really cool too. We also have our local Bloomington Police Department has police camp, and we secured some spots with them every summer. The YMCA, their camp for their little ones, people that are interested in becoming a babysitter or working at a daycare, we've been able to pair up and put some people there and work there. And once they left our services and went into VR services, ended up becoming employed there, actually. Or you can create new opportunities where you see a need. We did that with our DSP Boost program. So there's a huge need for DSPs. So we created a DSP Boost program, and we're doing an internship program, extensive training for DSPs. Next. Student Self-Advocacy Group. So we created this group. It will be 2 years this summer. So Self-Advocates is a state group, and the Student Self-Advocates Group is the first student self-advocates group in the state. We are transition aged, and it's really created to push transition information out to the students and the families. We meet once a week. The first of the month is always like their officer meeting. We have a president, a vice president, treasury, so all the board members, there's voting involved. And then the third week of the month, we have a speaker series. So we'll invite people from VR, beads, all different of the services to come and speak and talk about those services. And when that happens, we open that up to anybody. So parents will come, teachers will come. You'll see down here in the right-hand corner, VR came to speak, and we had a crowd that day. I mean, there's family members, there's students. A lot of people show up for that, and they're actually very thankful that we hold those. And I get a lot of thank yous. Thanks for that information. So we'll do that. And then, rinse and repeat, do the same thing again the following year, because you can't hear it enough. Families just can't hear it enough. What is VR? So that's always good. And then the other 2 weeks is just really classes and educational or planning things. So this is really held we really are trying to build tomorrow's leaders with self-advocacy and teaching them about the services that are available to them, getting them ready for that transition out of high school into the adult world. Next. This is a little video about Student Self-Advocates Group. If anybody's interested in creating one locally where you're at, our group would be glad to present to you and help with that.
Student Self-Advocates in Monroe County was created because there's a need to share with transition-age students the services that are available to them. I sat with 10 students and asked them if they knew about different services, and I used multiple terms to convey that. Voc Rehab Services, VR, BEADS, Bureau of Disabilities, job coaches, employment consultants, day services, rec therapy. During that entire conversation, I only had 2 hands raised. They do not know what services are available to them. We as providers need to do a better job. So after seeing this need, we knew that we had to find a different way to get this information out. We created Student Self-Advocates in Monroe County to empower, educate, and enact change in our community. We're doing that through a peer-to-peer model. The current Student Self-Advocates are learning about all the different resources available to them as young adults and adults as they transition. They will then take all of this information and share it with their peers through different presentations in our community. We started this group with Lemonade Day in our community, and we kicked it off with a week-long camp of Lemonade Week, and they started with nothing. They were responsible for going out to the community and telling the community what they stood for and who they were. The students were so successful, they got enough resources to sell lemonade to 400 people. The stand won runner-up for best of the best. That week, the students learned how to work as a team. They worked on social skills. They learned self-advocacy, self-awareness, and leadership skills. During the 4th of July parade, they went out and spread the news about their cause and who they are. The State Self-Advocates of Indiana came and visited our group, and they shared how to run self-advocates meetings and how to become part of the chapter. We turned around and shared that information with another group that came to visit us from Shelbyville. Student Self-Advocates of Monroe County registered with Self-Advocates of Indiana, and we are now the first transition-age self-advocates group in the state of Indiana. We hope that this grassroots movement, which we started through pre-employment transition services, catches like wildfire, and that we are not just the only transition-age student self-advocates, but that there become 2 and 3 and 4 and more throughout the entire state to create tomorrow's leaders.
We are transition-age students
with disabilities
seeking
to empower
each other, educate peers, and enact
change
in our community.
So another thing we do is the post-secondary counseling. And I talked about that a little bit with that Greek life. So I don't think I need to spend a lot of time here, but I do want to touch base on something that is really important and valuable is translating that IEP into college accommodations. So an IEP is what's the word I'm looking for? It comes with your schooling. I can't think of the word I'm looking for. But when you become an adult, those things are not just there. Like you have to go seek them. So we help students figure out what that means for them when they move on. And without that, sometimes that can mean just failure. So that's something that turns out to usually be a lot of help for them. Next slide. So now we have a guest speaker with us. Jennifer Robinson is from Community Transitions from Monroe County Community School Corporation. And we're going to do a little Q&A. So hello, Jennifer.
Hello.
So we have a couple questions for you. We want to get your teacher's perspective of what pre-ETS looks like from your perspective. So the first question I have is, what does pre-ETS look like for your class of students?
Sure. Well, it looks different for each student. Some of them, almost all of them, have met virtually, especially this year, in small groups, one-on-one sessions, and they're just working on the skills they need with their pre-ETS instructors. There's been work experiences, paid work experiences, which always go over really well. Informational interviews, assessments. Pre-ETS helps work on their transition portfolios and resumes, and helping with things to put in that portfolio to beef that up, and social skills, volunteer sites. I mean, there's been a really wide variety based on what the student needs, and obviously the self-advocates group as well.
And from your perspective, would you say that pre-ETS supports the student, the family, the teacher, or all?
For me, I think that the pre-ETS instructors have been a really important part of just the educational team. They're another voice who provides information to students and families, and I think it's really helpful for students to hear information a lot of different ways or from different people, just to reinforce and supplement what they're learning, building on what they're learning from us. And I think that the families have and it's been really good for the students too, to have those after school opportunities and breaks, just to have additional things to learn about and additional opportunities.
What is the most beneficial thing that's come out of Pre-ETS that you've seen?
From a teacher's perspective, I really appreciate the flexibility that Pre-ETS has. I think they're able to offer students a lot of different experiences that sometimes being confined in a school day, the school schedule is a challenge. And I think it's also a really nice bridge to VR services. You know, they can make the referrals, and it just helps families get used to working with adult agencies and making that bridge to employment. I think thinking more about employment and focusing more on work readiness skills.
When thinking about referring a student to Pre-ETS, what criteria do you think about?
Well, I do a transition program, so most of my students are pretty good candidates for Pre-ETS. And they're working on life skills and employment skills anyway. But I really do focus particularly on the students that don't have that much work experience, that they just need more instruction on social skills. They have obvious social needs and an obvious lack of kind of workplace readiness. There's a lot of gaps there. But I want those obviously addressed before they leave school programming as much as possible. I also talk to the students about it and try to explain to them what Pre-ETS is, and talk to them about what skills they see as challenges and what I could do, what Pre-ETS could do, and as a team help them build those skills. And then sometimes I have students that have done Pre-ETS and feel like they're ready to move on too. So it's really working with them to figure out what they need.
What type of things do you collaborate on with the Pre-ETS program?
Well, I communicate a lot, I feel like, with the Pre-ETS team and staff. There's stuff that comes up, changes and challenges, and we have a really nice working relationship of communicating those to each other. I mean, initially it's when can the student meet and scheduling, logistics, things like that. And then really trying to focus what needs need to be met. And if there are issues that come up, say like a behavioral or some other challenge, working together with that to solve that. And Pre-ETS also helps me with the student or the family following up on things and just providing information and making sure that they're really great at just helping, I think, support me as a teacher and support the students. So.
Do you have anything else you want to add about Pre-ETS?
No, just that I feel like it's been a really positive experience and really valuable for the students and for me. I think it's been great.
Thank you, Jennifer. And then if you could put your email address, Jennifer, in the chat for anybody if they wanted to ask you questions, that would be great. Thank you. And you can go to the next slide. So just to kind of hit on what Jennifer was saying, collaborating, one thing that we can do is help with those transition portfolios. So teachers have to have portfolios. We have to have portfolios. They might look a little different depending on where you're at and what you're using for that portfolio. If you're using, Naviance or Indiana Career Connect, I think it's called, or Google Sites. So we are in our program using Google Sites because MCCSC is using Naviance and we don't have access to that. But anyway, we can still swap and share the stuff. So what I also like about Google Sites is that we will create it with a student email that's not attached to a school email. So then they can take this with them to their VR provider or, wherever they move on from there. It's a living and breathing document, and it will have all of their stuff in here for them. These are just, I love these things. I think they're fun little websites, their own personal websites, and it just is chocked full of information. And you hand this over to another provider, like once they leave Pre-ETS and they go into VR services, it is full of information for discovery. I mean, it's like, what did they like? What did they not like? And what's really great is because so many times if you get somebody in VR services, they don't remember where they worked at or what years it was or who their supervisor was. And so this captures all of that and it gets to follow them. And I think that wraps it up. Next slide. Yep, we're at the Q&A. See, one of the questions said, with COVID-19 virus, the school is not allowing field trips. How do I get past this issue? Well, you could, it just depends. Some things that we've done is we've met with students either in the morning and then take them to school, or they get out early and we meet them in the afternoon. So no transporting, to or from. So it depends on what their schedule looks like. Or have them do the activities after school. So that would be an option potentially. Should the Pre-ETS consultant be embedded in the school or only go 1 or 2 days a week? I think that depends on the school and what you're wanting to accomplish. We don't embed our Pre-ETS consultants in the school at all. Sometimes we're in the schools. We do have a classroom if we need to go in there. We haven't been in that all this year because of COVID, but I really push for my instructors to not be in the schools, to go out into the community and to do things in the community. So I think that's really based on what you're trying to accomplish if you're having classes in school. But again, I see it as an extension of the teachers. So what the teachers are teaching, let's take that and put that into action or just extend it a little further. How do you get the food and supplies to keep the pantry full? We don't. We just check it. It gets full. People just fill it. And if it's not full, then our students are responsible for creating like a poster and a flyer and putting it out there on our Facebook page. But there's always stuff in it. We have to just in the wintertime, take out the stuff that would freeze, that kind of stuff, check the dates on it. So let's see, there's some stuff in the chat. Did I miss anything?
No, one of the questions that was in chat was also posted to the Q&A. And then the other question was answered when you were talking about transition portfolios, unless.
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, I think it was answered.
Yeah, so unless anyone else has a question that they want to put into the Q&A or that we can answer later on. Otherwise, I think we're good to move on to Luke.
Yeah, next up is Luke Labas.
Hi everyone. Thanks for being here today, and I'm happy to be a part of this esteemed group of colleagues. And I have been tasked with kind of wrapping a bow around this whole conversation and share some of my personal experiences. So I currently work in for the City of Indianapolis Office of Disability Affairs. So what does that mean? Well, that means a couple of things. That means I serve as the EDA coordinator for the City of Indianapolis. But it also means I'm a direct advisor to Mayor Hogsett and his office on all things disability for the city. So I'm new to the city. I've been on the job for just over 2 months now. But how did I get here? So and that's part of what I want to discuss with you and kind of look at disability employment from a broad overview. So I graduate high school. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So I graduate high school, and then I move away and I go to Ball State University. Okay, when I was a sophomore in high school, I decided to strike up a relationship with Ball State's Disability Services Office. A bit early, sure, and by choice, sure, because disclosures are choice. But I found that to be incredibly helpful because not only from the academic rigor perspective, but the logistics of moving away and attending a post-secondary institution away from home, there's a lot of logistics that you need there. So that's part of the networking process. And to everyone's point here so far during the presentation, they've stressed networking. Okay, and networking could be something as simple as Steve and Jonathan were mentioning earlier about going through a job shadow or walking through a job site, just to be visible. And I'll share a personal experience for you. I was up in the Ball State Learning Center for almost every day for an entire semester. Why? Because I didn't use tutoring services, but I wanted a job. So I would just go sit there and talk to the grad assistants and the other staff just to pick their brain. And what do I know? Next semester, I got a job, and I was the first person with a disability ever hired to work in the Learning Center at Ball State. And now that person that hired me has left and gone to another school out of state, and they're looking for students with disabilities to hire in positions at that school. So why is this so important? Because transition, it's a team effort. Like I just mentioned, your disability services office, your parents, your peers. MaryEllen hit something really, really important. Peer-to-peer support is huge. And if you can go to somebody or a group of people that are going through a similar experience or have been through a similar experience, you're going to hopefully not trip over some of the same hurdles or better know how to navigate those. And one of the best ways to do that is centers for independent living and different service providers that are on this call. Okay, we all work in this disability space, and we're all peers in a way. Now we all have certain specialties or certain things we do, but we're all peers, and we're all in this effort together. So why is Pre-ETS and this whole webinar and discussion important? Because access to competitive integrated employment helps address the other barriers that people with disabilities face in society. And what do I mean by that? With greater financial resources, it is easier to find housing, it is easier to find transportation, and it helps address these other barriers. And not only does it do that, from a financial perspective, but it gives people with disabilities greater credibility in the rooms that they are in and their social circles. And why is that important? Because when people with disabilities are in the room, when processes and decisions are being developed, if people with disabilities are in the room, these processes become more equitable and accessible for all. And it starts with economics. It's an economics issue. Because whether we like it or not, society is set up in a way where the people that have access to capital or greater financial resources are the ones that predominantly make the decisions. And we need people with disabilities to be part of that economic mobility process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, networking is so important. Join boards, and this was a point that was mentioned on the last slide. Join boards, committees, get involved in your local disability advocacy organizations, because if you do that, boards are looking to diversify. Okay, you got, like Steve was mentioning, one of the places where VR often does their work within schools and such are in offices focused on diversity and equity, and with employers. Okay, disability is the largest minority group in the United States. Disability doesn't care about race, gender, religion. It impacts all of those groups. The intersectionality of disability makes it the largest minority group. So we need to be looking at disability as an asset, because the reality is, if you don't have a disability today, if you live long enough, you're likely going to age into it. So whether it's employment, whether it's anything, we need to be looking at, people with disabilities and that perspective being in the room as an asset. So, and I would encourage employers, particularly employers, to be intentional about your relationships. And it goes back to viewing disability as an asset. Research shows that when employers hire individuals with disabilities, the workforce is more productive. Productivity increases. And so, but I would be intentional about those. Review your HR hiring processes. Review your remote working policies. One of the few good things about the pandemic potentially is it's really forced companies and employers to be flexible, and everybody's had to work from home for over the last year. Okay, and people with disabilities have been requesting as an accommodation the ability to work from home for years. But now that's become the norm for everyone for the last year. So maybe that's a way for service providers and employers to open up and look at increasing employment opportunities for people with disabilities. But from an employer perspective, be intentional about the relationships you build. What we don't want is people with disabilities just to be a checkbox. So, and to build off that, and I've had a lot of good mentors and wise people in my life up to this point. And one of them once said, people with disabilities should not be hired because of their disability, but they should not be denied the opportunity because of their disability. So I wanted to broaden this out, because we've been talking about employment, and and from an employer perspective, you'll hear a lot of concerns about cost, whether it's accommodations, transportation, oh, I don't know how my coworkers coworkers in the department will react, or what if this person will need more time off work and things. So a lot of accommodations are one-time expenses. And I want to bring up a point here to everyone in the audience. So look at an office chair. Is an office chair an accommodation? I would submit yes. And I think everyone except me, because I have my own, but I think everyone has an office chair. So why exactly? So is a mouse and a keyboard. So why do we not look at those as accommodations, but we look at providing accommodations and leveling the playing field, not making a job easier. What accommodations do is level the playing field, allow you to perform the essential functions of your job well. Okay, so why do we look at accommodations for people with disabilities as extra cost? Because in many cases, it's a one-time expense, and it'll pay for itself over and over, and it'll allow the individual to be more productive. Okay, if you didn't have an office chair and you had to stand at your desk all day, would you be as productive? I would submit not. So again, breaking down these barriers and misconceptions of accommodations and cost, and again, look at the data and the research out there. When you are working alongside your peer with a disability, productivity increases. And if you're an employer and you see one person with a disability, they're likely going to hire multiple after they go through that experience and realize the benefit and the asset they are to your organization. So not only are you expanding yourself from an individual perspective and becoming more disability aware, but there's an opportunity for corporate growth as well. There's personal growth here, and there's corporate growth. I would submit hiring people with disabilities actually grows your bottom line. And yet, often we hear about cost and the extra burdens of hiring people with disabilities. So how do I want to wrap all this up? What does this take? This takes people on this call and people in different communities across the state, as particularly we're talking about the Work to Include Coalition, employers, chambers of commerce, VR counselors, disability services organizations, parents, and the individuals themselves. We need champions to champion the cause of community and integrated employment in our communities. And again, it's not a one-person effort. It is a team effort. And as you can see on that slide, there's all of our contact information. And Ms. Robinson dropped her email in the chat as well. So I just want to say thank you for coming today, and I look forward to working with this group and hearing from some of you on what you're doing. Is there any final questions from the audience? Hi, Latoya. Guys, Latoya actually used to be my VR counselor.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. This webinar will be recorded and pushed out to all registrants, as well as posted on YouTube and our Work to Include website. Thank you, everybody.